We'll take a detour today into energy dynamics and go slightly deeper into this concept of energy dynamics, taking help of two psychological concepts, activation and deactivation. And from there, stretch our discussion to spiritual freedom. So, we'll take a look today into this part. This part of energy dynamics is related to prana and all the energy healing systems, pranic healing, Reiki, acupressure, acupuncture, Tai Chi, all the martial arts, much of Chinese medicine, much of Indian classical yogic medicine. Let us go into it. When we talk of energy dynamics in the context of psychology, especially psychoanalysis, we have a history to this concept. But theoretically, whenever somebody created an edifice around the centrality of energy, that edifice did not go far, and very soon it sort of self-eroded. Those edifices in psychoanalysis were very evanescent edifices, not enduring edifices, very evanescent. And these evanescent edifices, we have to re-excavate and develop further in the context of today's advances in knowledge and even more awaiting tomorrow's advances in knowledge. Essentially, when we talk about energy in the context of psychology, especially psychoanalysis, we are on the frontiers. We are essentially talking about the science of tomorrow. So today we can talk not in empirical terms, but in essential terms, in experiential terms, in terms that has been experientially validated for centuries in tradition. So let us look at the area. Energy was talked about by Freud in the form of libido, by Jung in the form of life energy, he used this term, and in the East, prana, or in China it is chi. That has been talked about for a very long time. So anyone who has gone deep into himself for a considerable period of time and has been lucky and open enough, he encounters something called life energy, or at least something that he calls life energy. It may be some other substance than energy, we don't know, but something that he calls energy, and most people feel it that way. And one realizes that just as there is a circulatory system for blood, there is a full circulatory system for energy also, but it is not physical, it is subtle, cannot be seen by our senses. Some other faculty than the senses is necessary to look at it, at least not the outward bound senses. So Freud started off this discussion by creating what is called the hydraulic model, where the idea was that the core of pathology was something which he called the traumatic memory, and later on it was got to be called as a complex, where there was an idea and there was memory and there was a lot of energy built into that constellation. So the core of pathology was a traumatic constellation where libido was blocked up, and to release this libido, one had to undergo psychoanalysis and one had to relive that experience. And this jamming up of energy and releasing of that bonded energy was called the hydraulic model, because libido was almost treated like a fluid which can be blocked and which can be released. And when it is blocked too much, it creates a pathology. So this was called Freud's hydraulic model. This hydraulic model also talked about cathexis and decathexis. That if too much of energy is involved, blocked in a traumatic memory, so much less energy is available for happy and productive purposes. So energy released from here will go there. So it was like a hydraulic system called the hydraulic model, also called as the economical model. You take investment out from one side and put the investment into another side of energy, or what Freud will call libido. And then Jung took up the idea of a complex, a redefined complex as idea toned with affect. But he did not go into what was the connection between idea and the affect. Why was the affect bonded to that idea? And when in psychoanalysis or in any form of reliving, when that became conscious and the affect dissipated free from that idea, what process happened that enabled the affect to set itself free from an idea which it was not able to free itself from before that freeing movement happened? So Jung could not create any explanation on how, in process terms, the affect was bonded to this idea. What upheld this intonation? What sustained this intonation? Not only sustained, but at times the complex develops itself into more branches and it becomes more elaborate. So what is it that enables a complex to develop itself into more complicated branch structure? And at times the complex erodes out over a period of time if it's a weak complex. So what process enables the complex to get into a process of self-erosion? So that mathematics of affect, that when affect goes beyond a particular point, the complex cannot self-erode, it sustains. And if it goes furthermore, then the complex develops. So this fate of the complex, the life cycle of the complex, or to divide all complexes into three parts. A, complexes which self-erode. B, complexes which sustain but don't develop. C, complexes that develop themselves. You could not make out any theory related to how intonation happened or how these three different complex categories came into existence and what was the mechanics of that particular existence of those complexes. In Indian psychology, we talk about energy blockage in a chakra or energy depletion in a chakra, or energy blockages and depletion across any part of the body, not necessarily a chakra. And the idea is very simple: remove the blockage, clean the chakra or clean that location, and fill it up with fresh energy, good energy. In Chinese approach, in acupressure and acupuncture, the energy blocks are relieved in acupressure by putting physical pressure and acupuncture by putting in needles. And the idea is, if at certain points pressure is given by normal pressing or by a puncture, somewhere to which that site is related, the energy which is blocked is released. Which means, in Jungian terms, the affect which is bonded to an idea, that bond breaks because of this pressure. In what way we don't know, but we do get the results. If not every time, a majority of the times. Then we have martial arts, many of which are used for healing, and they are also used to release the affect which is bonded with an idea. And that can be in any part of the body. So seen from this point, energy point of view, pathology is depletion or blockage of energy on any complex. If the complex is a positive complex, the depletion of energy is a problem. If the complex is a negative complex, excess blocked energy is a problem. And healing is to undo the pathology, which means healing would mean energizing a positive complex and de-energizing a negative complex. And in heat, what we do is we do a synthesis of activation and deactivation of all these approaches as well as Eastern spiritual models. And in an experiential way, we understand and feel the blockages or the depletion. And for that, you have to learn pranic healing or experientially develop oneself. And then we look at in future empirical investigation of this phenomena of energy. In fact, in understanding of mania, many experts of mania have started looking very deeply at this whole idea of energy aspects of mania. So let us try to understand schematically in heat terms how energy dynamic works, and this is not a new thing. Heat is borrowing these ideas from tradition. So the tradition tells us, particularly Indian spiritual tradition, that energy is generated at the root of the spine, or it is generated or it is absorbed from the atmosphere. However, it moves from down to top. And you have chakras in the body. C7 is the root, C6 is the sex chakra, C5 the power chakra, C4 the heart chakra, C3 expression chakra, C2 thinking chakra, C1 spiritual and mystical chakra. And there are Sanskrit names for it. The Muladhara, C7 is Muladhara, C6 is Swadhisthana, C5 is Manipur, C4 is Anahat, C3 is Vishuddha, C2 is Ajna, and C1 is Sahasra. You don't have to remember the Sanskrit names, but each chakra is responsible for certain psychological motivations and functions. So this one, bottom one is for survival, C6 for sexuality, C5 for power, C4 for emotions, feelings and relationships, C3 for art and creativity, C2 for logic and thinking, C1 for mysticism and spirituality. Now what happens? Energies moves from the bottom to the top. And where does it come at the bottom from? It comes from food, it comes from the universe. It comes from partially sunlight. This is what is said in tradition. Leaving the veracity of that aside, what we are told is in terms of the model, energy moves from bottom to the top. And at any given point, whichever chakra is active, based upon the purpose of the individual at that point, that chakra becomes active. And the moment the chakra becomes active, essentially by desire, let us say at point instant 1, in the first example, somebody is thinking, let's say these chakras represent chakra system of an individual I1. And at point T1, this person I1 is thinking about how to become boss of a company. So he is having active the desire of power. So when the desire for power activates, C5 activates, because C5, Manipur chakra, deals with power. So when the desire for power activates, C5 activates. And the moment C5 activates, a substance, not a substance, but an entity which I define as affinity, gets deposited on C5. And amount of affinity depends upon the strength of desire and a few other variables which we have seen in essential affect system, right? Lecture 2. So when desire for power activates, C5 is activated, affinity is directed to C5, gets deposited over C5, and affinity is like a magnet. It attracts the life energy. So this life energy which was going straight up, because of this activation, goes here to C5. And then C5, once it gets life energy, it starts using faculty elementals of thinking to explore how to satisfy this desire. This is instance 1, when the desire for power is active. Let us take another instance. Somebody wants to have a good relationship with somebody else, and he starts thinking how to make it happen. So instance 2 of individual 2, energy is moving up, and now 2 chakras of this individual are active. C4 has a desire to have a good relationship with somebody, say X, and to have that, it is thinking what to do. The person is thinking what to do. So C2 is associated with thinking. So at this moment, C2 and C4 are active. So the energy which was moving up gets divided into C4 and C2. Example 3. Let us say there is an individual who is in a psychological state where none of these chakras are active, and this happens to us a few times a day, particularly in evenings and early mornings, when none of the desires are really active and we are at rest. And this, for this person, therefore, energy rises, goes straight to C1. So when none of this is active, by nature the energy goes to C1, and therefore we get a feeling of bliss. When none of this is active, naturally there is peace. When C2 to C7, none of this is active. When C2 to C7, none of this is active, there is peace because of inactivity of all the chakras. And because C1 is energized, there is a feeling of bliss. Now this is Jung's idea of affect, complex one. There is an idea, and idea is bound to the affect. There is affect around the idea, and something is keeping this bond of idea to affect very strong. And complex can be a normal complex which can function normally, or it can be a pathological complex. And the core is, in case it's a pathological complex, how to break this connection of idea to affect, so that the affect can be set free from the idea, and then this idea has to be made conscious and the affect has to be released in catharsis. So affinity deflects energy towards the chakra. Now opposite of affinity is awareness. While this is happening, say C5, if you become aware, you start seeing the whole process in operation. And with awareness, one can change the process, change the habit, change the unconscious schema. And when you do that, if you keep focusing awareness on C5, the affinity either is moved away from C5 or the affinity annihilates. Awareness overcomes affinity. It heals affinity, it annihilates affinity, or sets affinity free. And if you can remove affinity altogether from moving into C2 to C7, you become enlightened. Of course, a minimum affinity is there, but apart from that minimum affinity movement, 95% or 90% of affinity is removed from its compulsive movement into C7 to C2 in enlightenment. So the question is, what will break this bond? What will set the affect free from a pathological complex and allow the idea in the center to be conscious? So in heat, we realize that all these things heal. There will be many more things, but a small list is here. What will heal the pathological complex? And one thing is common in every case of healing: energy which is bound into the pathological complex is released from the pathological complex. And what will enable that release? One, it can be knowledge. That you have a grudge towards somebody, and then you get information that he is doing something good to you, and suddenly that grudge goes. Energy which was bound in that complex of hatred and anger is released because of new knowledge. Awareness can bring about that change. You observe a phenomena and the compulsiveness drops out. Insight, which is the core of psychoanalysis, can bring about such changes. That many times we see, you give an interpretation and insight is created and the person undergoes a change. Affect release, when you press for affect in approaches like ISTDP, EDT, AUM, ECT, then also you have the same effect, same outcome. In self-expression, when the self-expression starts from a conscious mind, then goes into pre-conscious, into unconscious, till the breaking down of language at times, and the self-expression exhausts itself. And when that is accepted without any criticism, any attack, that also helps heal. Self-acceptance, that is another approach. Internalization of good object, that helps release the bound fear from catastrophic complexes. Healthy cohesion self-creation, that decathexis the split, the Oedipus and other usual issues, and cathexis the healthy part of us. Psychiatric medication also can do the same thing. Homeopathy medication, herbal medication, and energy healing. Reiki, pranic healing, these are very powerful tools for decathexis or cathexis. We have not used it. We know the concepts, cathexis and decathexis. We have not used energy healing tool for cathexis and decathexis. Now, in this context of energy, let us look at activation and deactivation. When energy is invested into something, cathexis happens, that thing activates. When energy is taken away, it deactivates. Or if not deactivates, at least weakens. So we start the discussion on activation and deactivation with selective attention. That selective attention has always been known that we don't have adequate processing capability, and so we have no choice but to be selective in our processing. So the very limitation of our brain power and the enormity of data we have to deal with creates a need for selective attention. Freud got in the same concept in the name of preconscious. That what from the preconscious we focus upon, that becomes active, becomes activated. Otherwise, in a deactivated form, it remains in the preconscious. In the unconscious, there may be things which are active but repressed, and that's the worst part of it. So activation and deactivation per se is nothing right or wrong about it. We want activation of good complexes and deactivation of bad complexes. And if there has been deactivation of good complexes, we have to undo it. And if there has been activation of bad complexes, we have to undo it. You talk of activation and deactivation in the form of archetypes. That according to the program of life, the self activates or deactivates archetypes appropriate to the program of life. Deactivation is very different from repression, because deactivation can be in the area of preconscious also, where we don't have repression of that type. When much of the system is in deactivated state, we get the feeling of stillness and bliss. They are two different things. You can have feeling of stillness without any thought, or you can have a state of bliss without any thought. In this case, from a chakra point of view, you are above the Agnya chakra but below the Sahasrara chakra. Here you are in the Sahasrara chakra. Object relations view is the moment you get into an object relation, you get into an active state. And when you don't have an object relation, you are in a deactivated state from a system point of view. But object relations does not believe you can be in a object free state, or rather object relation free state. But it is possible. Spiritual experiences tell us, and we can experience it ourselves. It is possible to be in an object free state, not for long periods of time, but definitely it's possible. In a state of primary narcissism that Freud talks about, or in a state of enlightenment that spirituality talks about, the top chakra becomes active and all other chakras get deactivated. So let us look at how we see activation and deactivation in the pathological context. That a person has strong pathological complexes, then how the two operationally act in practice. Activation happens by association dynamic, energy dynamic, and root dynamic or regular cathexis. What is association dynamic? Let us say when I was a child and it rained heavily, I saw large trees swaying and making sound and I got frightened. Today, when the rainy season sets in, there are no trees around me, but I still get frightened as though these big trees are going to fall upon me, as I was frightened in the childhood. So there is an association between the clouds, the onset of rainy season, and that fear. So that association dynamic can precipitate a pathology, an episode, or a state. Then there is energy dynamic. So certain pathological complexes can get activated because of association dynamic. We experience something which gets associated to the pathological complex. Or there can be an energy dynamic, meaning in winters, larger amount of energy is generated in the system. So it is allocated even if in the same proportion to all the elements. The energy that a pathological complex gets in winter is much higher. And the same is true about beginning of the day or early morning or evening when the energy levels are naturally higher, or season change when energy levels are naturally higher, or winter. So early morning, evening, season change, and winter. These three time zones, energy is higher, and therefore pathological complexes also get more energy and they start producing more symptoms. So we see many psychosomatic problems worsen either early morning or evening or during season change or in winter. We can think of asthma, we can think of arthritis. Then there is en route activation. For example, if a child had intense pleasure at the breast in the oral stage, and in the adult life, suddenly he finds himself in a situation where there is a complete loss of pleasure, then there is regression to that early state of what I call bliss at the breast. However, that early stage is a pre-Oedipal stage. And while you go to that pre-Oedipal stage en route, the Oedipus complex is chronologically somewhere before it. So although the regression is to the bliss at the breast stage, some part of Oedipus also gets energized and energy moves onto that part. So it gets activated because of an en route movement. The Oedipus is on the route to the destination. And then there is regular cathexis because of everyday life. Something gets activated, something gets deactivated. Let us look at deactivation phenomena. Say inertia, how do we deal with our inertia? It's very difficult to transform it. So most of the time we cover it up. We deactivate by covering it up with some layer, and then we go outside of that cover and get lost into our world of activity. But if you remove that cover and go near to inertia, we really feel the full power of inertia and not doing any activity. Not recommended to do it, very few people can handle it. Or we deactivate something partially, because completely it cannot be done by this method, by reaction formation. We give a jump out of that thing by reaction formation. So often we do this for Oedipus, that we give a reaction formation jump and we get into something else. And often we also use cover and reaction formation jump, both, to deactivate partially something or at least be away from the full power of that pathological entity. It can happen en route also, that you have to suppress something at 3 years of age, and therefore something at 5 years of age automatically gets suppressed. The mechanism of global amnesia that can deactivate certain things may not be completely in energy terms, but definitely in awareness terms. And then this regular decathexis because of everyday activities. The whole idea is how to know, understand, and then integrate this activation, deactivation as it is happening. Goal is mastery. More pragmatic station is being able to consciously manage it. In certain cases, deactivation may be the best solution. We may not be able to transform it completely. So these defenses of cover up, reaction formation, maybe some defense is the best way out in certain cases. Therapy. In therapy, what do we see? How do you see this energy dynamic activation and deactivation? We see three kinds of complexes. One, that over a period of time self-erode. We don't have to worry about it. System takes care of it. Second, complexes that are sustainable for a long period of time. And third, complexes that grow, the most dangerous part. So when they grow, we have to move slowly from the leaf to the branch to the trunk to the root. We cannot directly go to the root. It's too disturbing for the patient, he runs away. So in therapy, what we are looking at is, here we move from the leaf to the branch to the trunk to the root. Here, depending on the intensity, we can go to the root or not go to the root. And ultimately, what we want, activation of the inactive good complexes and deactivation of the bad overactive complexes. And what do we do for this? We use standard therapy tools. We have done this before. What works, and the patient uses standard defenses. Ultimately, it's a struggle of freedom versus compulsion. There is a unconscious, outside of our control, activation and deactivation of entities, and there can be a state where we are free to choose and will activation and deactivation of entities. And the state of freedom is our goal, and the state of compulsion is a state of pathology. What are the holistic and spiritual tools in this context? Music can be used to activate certain states of mind, certain entities. I often use this if I put on a song and I go into certain state of mind thinking about something and I want that background to be steady. I keep repeating that song again and again to keep that background steady. And in that background steady, I'm able to think much better. So to explore certain states, to continue with certain states, music is very important. Music can also be used as switch state, as a switch tool. To switch from a happy mood to a sad mood to a happy mood, whatever you want. Yoga practices can help you get into certain states. Certain breathing practices will get you into a state of bliss, state of peace, state of stillness. Listening to good preaching will take you into certain states. Certain spiritual practices will take you into certain states. And these states involve activation and deactivation of different elements. Essentially, we are talking about energy cathexis and energy decathexis in activation and deactivation, and compulsion to freedom and mastery. Now, this mastery cannot happen unless self journey, karma, grace, and the principle that we talked about in the philosophy of heat, they all allow. We can't fight this principle. So, by effort, we can go to some distance, but we need blessings of self journey and karma, and in some cases, grace. Only then, in accordance with the principle, we can move to a state of mastery. This is also said in a different way that if you master the energy body, if you master the whole movement of prana, you master the whole movement of chi, then you can master full activation and deactivation. Otherwise, we are not able to master full activation and deactivation, but very intense entities, both positive and negative, their activation and deactivation, if not total, at least partial, we are able to master and manage. How does heat proceed in this? Heat goes first by observation. Observation of this phenomena of activation and deactivation in all areas of life. We can even take a chakra vantage point. Go into each chakra and see any phenomena where activation and deactivation is observed. Or look at chakra themselves, which chakra is activated or deactivated more than or less than optimum. Then become awareness of the process as it happens. First record it. First observe it, record it. Observe everything, record the difficult, whatever you wish to change. Then be aware of it as that actually is an operation. Understand the force field, how it is happening. Then heal the intensity of the problem at first. You may not heal the full problem, but the intensity will come down. Go into ego strength enhancement. We have done it in the lecture before. What enhances the ego strength? Develop a holistic healing basket in the view of the above. This also we have done in 02. And then with all of this, go for the goal of mastery, or if not mastery is not possible, management. So this is how the concept of energy dynamics, activation, deactivation, the spiritual concept of enlightenment, which is to have mastery on deactivation and activation of entities inside of us, all of it comes together. Energy dynamics, activation, deactivation, psychotherapy, healing, spiritual enlightenment.